All right. How's it going, James?
It's going pretty good. How's it going?
Quite well. And I want to talk about this article you wrote on your blog called
Yes.
Input Output.
Finally,
And
after 3
I've
months, I got
processed it, but I must admit I have not internalized all the golden nuggets therein. So you'll have to give me a summary, and basically, as far as I understand it, and you can tell me when I'm wrong here. What you're saying is there are two pieces of learning, which are input and output, and learning is only valuable insofar as it aids in the output, and the output is only useful in as far as it's shared with the real world. Is that roughly correct?
That is roughly correct. Yeah, that's a pretty good summary of it, given that it was so rambly and incoherent, probably.
No, don't say that. I liked it a lot.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a good article.
I
And
really
there are a lot of beautiful illustrations.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this and you haven't seen it, what we're going to describe is some of the ideas, but you should still go look at it so you can see these beautiful pixel art illustrations that James made. Highly recommend looking at that.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So the basic idea was just to get something out there, really. So, I basically started with a little bit of sort of abstract stuff about learning, and in particular about cost and value. I kind of intend to go back to it because it sort of needs to be explored more, and I don't think I made the connection between that and input-output clear. But basically, what I meant with value is that everyone when they learn, they have some sort of goal that they're trying to achieve, or some, I call it like a value function, although I think that sounds too mechanical, but they have some sort of desire they're trying to satisfy when they learn. And in order to achieve that, when they learn, they have to balance costs and the sort of the costs of different learning processes, which may help them achieve those goals more or less, basically. And so the whole idea behind the input-output thing was to sort of reconcile a learning process, or my sort of view of the learning process with my views of value and cost. And so the whole idea behind input-output was like, basically, I think value in learning is creating creative output, basically. And so different people can have different views of what value is, but since that's my definition of it, I wanted to come up with some practical pattern that I could implement in SuperMemo in order to help me achieve that. And that was the input-output pattern. Yeah.
Okay, so what are some things that you would consider worthy in terms of output? Like, what output is valuable to you?
To me, it was all about output into the real world. I think last time, maybe on one of these podcasts, I mentioned the term like marketplace of ideas. And I feel like actually outputting creative output into the marketplace of ideas, where it can be evaluated in a natural rather than artificial context. So one of the differences I think there is between output, as I define it, and active learning, as I think probably people are familiar with that term. So active learning is like doing textbook exercises or exam questions. It's stuff where you're actually recalling information and synthesizing it and using it. But I wanted to make a distinction between that and output processes, because the context in which you're sending your ideas out into the world is totally different. In terms of these active processes, it always seems like it's an artificial context. So if you do exam questions, you're not really sharing your ideas into the marketplace to be evaluated by people who are really interested in benefiting from them. You're just getting either like maybe a teacher to mark them, or I don't know, some peer, or you're marking them yourself. You've not really contributed into the outside world, and that is just my subjective understanding of value. I think at the start I tried to make it clear that value is totally subjective. Of course, there are millions of different, probably not millions, but there are innumerable religions and theories of value, philosophies and stuff. So I knew there would never be one universal value function. But it was just, maybe you can substitute your own understanding of value and still get some useful nuggets from the article, even if you don't agree with what my interpretation of value is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the input-output dichotomy is useful in and of itself, even if you have a fundamentally distinct value function from James. But I guess just to put a finer point on what counts as output or valuable output, for you it's mostly writing and, let's say, computer programming that is contributing in some way to some larger project. Is that roughly correct?
Roughly correct, yeah. It was mostly about not having to get someone to look at what I made, you know? It was to create something valuable that people would want to use and then get their feedback, because I felt that was the best. That was like that to me is the ultimate outcome of learning. Like, you've created something that other people can derive value from themselves and then get feedback from them. And that was just what I felt was the ultimate
and I
goal.
think that's a really reasonable definition of like valuable output, because think of it, the way you're defining it there, that encompasses things like art, you know, not just necessarily writing, but technically a painting could contribute to someone else's whatever life in some way. Therefore, it counts as valuable output to you.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So I didn't want it to just be like creating value in the financial or economic sense, because I didn't want it just to be money, like, because you can create valuable things given my definition of value, even if it doesn't make money, I suppose, in a sense. Although you certainly could use lots of the ideas from like microeconomics and stuff. I think that'd be really interesting, actually, to apply that to learning and then say, since like a lot of the models from microeconomics sort of deal with the same problem as learning, because you're optimizing output for like resources. You're resource constrained, and you're trying to create as much output as you can with the resources you have. So I think there are parallels between microeconomics and learning, but it just felt a little bit mechanical to totally depend on the microeconomic models rather than create something a little bit more, I don't know, natural. It felt a little bit more natural, yeah.
Yeah, it feels more natural. Plus, the way that you describe it in the article, your value function is totally separate from any kind of revenue generation. I mean, it doesn't even have to make any money in order to be considered valuable, which is technically true. I mean, when you consider learning activities in and of themselves, it doesn't have to produce money in order to provide value into the world. It's just flatly untrue. So I think it's worthwhile to keep those separated. But I guess on that topic, another thing I wanted to ask was, do you think this view of learning with the input and output encompasses all of the valuable learning activities there are? So, you know, we've talked about a copper nugget transmutating into a golden nugget, you know, this kind of thing. Some learning can be non-obviously contributing to your output, and it's still valuable. And even let's say, even if it never does contribute in a true sense, it's still enjoyable, right? So is that type of learning distinct from entertainment, or what? How would you view it?
I guess you could include sort of leisure in your value function somehow. That I was sort of wrestling with that today. I sort of thought, well, since you can sort of define the value function however you want, you can sort of, there's no sort of constraint, so you're not really saying anything in the end, because you can always justify what you're doing just by saying, oh, well, that's actually part of my value function as well. I suppose the one constraint is that you have to be sort of internally consistent to a certain extent, because you can't say something that just contradicts another part of your value function. I'm not thrilled with that name either. It does feel very mechanical, but...
Well, I mean, that's fine. Let's just call it a tentative name. You can change it whenever you want. But
yeah. You're right with what you said about. I mean, we discussed it before. Like, you can't predict the value of ideas that well. Although I think that we discussed as well. Like, you can invest your time, you can allocate your time to those subjects where great ideas have been produced consistently in the past, and those tend to be the sciences, math, those with abstract ideas. So perhaps those are the best to focus on. Another interesting line of thought I had was, well, it might be interesting to combine this sort of theory side of it, the theory of value and cost, the theory of input and output, with an empirical approach. So you could record the ideas and the learning processes you did, and then evaluate which of those learning processes were produced the most value for you as you define it. So you can predict the value before and predict the value,
right.
and assess the value afterwards, and you'd sort of get two interesting numbers out of that. I don't know, numbers, probably not.
Right. Well,
measurements out of that. The first would be
right.
How well did you predict it? How calibrated were you in terms of how closely did your expectation match with reality? And the second one is, well, which of those ideas was the most valuable? Which ones should you invest in the future, if you know what I mean?
Right. And I think a really useful part of the framework is if you're learning on your own without an exam to pass or a degree to get or something like this, it isn't clear when your learning was valuable. And here I'm not speaking of the intrinsic value of learning in and of itself. But if you don't have a clearly defined mechanism for determining the value, it can be hard to calibrate because you have no idea whether the time you've been spending is fruitful or not. You know what I mean? So I think this gives a useful framework for determining the value of something, and therefore you can recalibrate your learning activities to increase your true value per minute as defined by your value function.
Exactly. Yeah, it's one of the reasons I'm so excited by the project me and Alexia are working on, LifeOS. So it's basically a replacement to Plan. I guess all the people listening to this mostly are going to be SuperMemo users, so they know what Plan is. But basically Plan is a way to manage your time. So you can create a list of all the activities you want to do in the day, and it's sort of a dynamic plan, so you can adjust the amount of time you really spent on the activity compared to the time that you wanted to spend. Well,
it's like proportional planning.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So me and Lexi, we wanted to improve it by number one, just updating the interface because it's a little bit old at this point, looking a little bit antiquated, but also by integrating tools like time trackers and things like that. And that's so exciting to me because it really feels like, since I do probably 100% of my learning on a computer at this point, it's just so, it lends itself so well to an empirical, quantifiable approach. Like, you can track literally everything you do, all the learning you do on your computer at any time. And then you can look at how your past learning, what value did it create for you in the end? How did your expectation of value match with reality and stuff like that? And it would just be totally automated. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just really interesting.
That would be extremely interesting. The only thing I wonder about is the intangibles that are there. So, technically, you could consume a lot of really valuable input, and that could potentially lead to valuable output. But you're just too lazy to get down to the writing.
Right.
Or whatever it is.
Yeah, so I guess then you can look at the ratio you spent between input, like the potential to create value, and your output, the creating of value that you do. And maybe you can adjust that, and I don't know, the possibilities are endless.
I guess that just gets into like other parts of self-discipline and whatever else. But Another interesting thing I thought of was you could technically separate value functions sort of by field. Like, I was thinking a lot of directors. What's the guy? He's a British director. He directed Baby Driver. Something Edgar. I forget.
I'm probably not going to get it. I'm so uneducated when it comes to film.
Anyway, I know that he's seen, he has a list of his favorite 1,000 movies, or maybe it's even 10,000. I don't know. It's a really extremely long list. And the point of what I'm saying is, to him, watching movies satisfies his value function because they aid him in making his own movies. So you could technically separate value functions by field, and you could optimize. Like if you wanted to get into movie making, you could figure out what the value functions of some of your favorite directors are.
Yes.
And then you could, yeah.
Yes. I was just about to say, like, that was one of the things I thought of. Like, can you compare the value functions between two people and see how well they overlap? And like, could you, like in Life OS, could you download like a was value function into your Life OS, and it would just schedule your activities accordingly to that? And like, I wonder if
amazing.
Yeah, I wonder how well a value function as calculated by Life OS would overlap with like other sort of philosophies of value, like religion, just philosophy in general. Like if two people call themselves Christians or whatever, would they have similar value functions in learning? That'd be interesting to explore. Like,
yeah, it's also yeah. Go ahead.
No, sorry, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's also worth wondering about how quantifiable it truly is. Like if you had all the data from SuperMemo or whatever it is, or how someone spends their time, are you truly quantifying their value function, or is it something else? Like I was having a conversation with George, and he was talking about how in teaching they had these ways of basically the core of what he was saying was that good readers and poor readers look the same when they're reading. So you can't look at them. Like if you ask a good reader, what are you doing while you read that book? They'll say, oh, I'm just reading. And a poor reader will say the same thing. But something is happening in the mind. You know, maybe the good reader is creating metaphors as they're reading or visually imagining things. And this aids in their understanding, or they're thinking about how it relates to other things they know. This all happens in the mind and you can't see it. So I wonder to what degree someone's output is not determined solely by their explicit value function, but some hidden process that goes on in the mind.
Yeah, it's a shame we sort of have to treat the mind as a black box, just since we don't have reliable like brain-computer interfaces and stuff like that. You're right. There probably is some internal stuff that you just lose, and you can't explain. Like you can't explain the totality of human behavior just by looking in from the outside. I guess that was behaviorism's, big downfall, right? But
yeah, I guess.
Yeah, perhaps in the future. I mean, I've not looked into it deeply enough to really know what I'm talking about. But there's Neuralink, obviously by Elon Musk. There's I think it's called Open BCI, Open Brain Computer Interface. They're doing these sort of, they almost look 3D printed. That have those sensors that you can just glue to your head, and you can record the frequencies of the brain waves or whatever. I wonder, I don't know how much that would contribute to what I'm talking about, but yeah, what you said is right. You can't really just, you can't explain the entire process of learning just from the outside. Yeah.
Well, I would say though, even in the absence of like brain-computer interfaces, if you had someone who was sufficiently successful at whatever at creating value, however it's determined, and they were sufficiently introspective, such that they could outline for you the at least an approximation of what goes on in their mind, you could then use that as a model, or at least a starting point for your own behavior if you wanted to create value in a similar way. I do think it's possible, and without a framework like this, it's not exactly clear to me what you'd ask someone. I mean, you could say, how do I do what you're doing? But it isn't clear that you're asking, what things are you learning that I can learn also? Because some learning in a field is not obviously contributing, but it does. So, that kind of thing. I think it gives a really good framework, but I think introspection is a necessary piece of being able to provide useful feedback to others who are curious about your value function because of the stuff that goes on in the mind.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said with introspection. Like there are those really interesting studies from, I can't remember the dates or years exactly, but I remember the name of the guy. I think he was from the Netherlands. It's like Adrian de Groot or something like that. He did a bunch of
Oh yeah, yeah,
studies
yeah,
on I think chess masters, and so
yeah.
he'd asked them to think aloud, basically, that use the introspective method to sort of investigate what was going on within their minds. And so
Mm,
he'd ask them a bunch of questions, and the chess masters would try and draw what they were visually seeing in their mind, and they'd try to sort of um, sort of try and understand how their thought process differed from just chess novices based on what they were
right,
able to describe with their own process. Yeah.
right. Yeah, I think Anders Ericsson, the expertise researcher,
Mm, mm,
he invented a similar way of thinking out loud because I think he discovered this as well. Experts do things in like strange enough ways that you have to know what's going on in their mind in order to know what's truly happening and why they're doing what they're doing. So that's interesting. And I guess the Anders Ericsson point, it makes me wonder if there's a way to deliberately practice such that you can increase your value per minute. You know what I mean? It just seems like they're so disconnected. Like your output it may come months or years after
mm.
your input. It seems really hard to optimize. Even if you have a solid sense of direction, it doesn't seem like you'll ever hit the ceiling because the minute optimizations can't occur due to the gap between input and output. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, just due to the massive uncertainty, it might just be totally impossible. But I think it's worth investigating. I really like the idea of just quantifying it, seeing to what extent it can be quantified, if it's even useful. Like, is it possible to like create sort of a design serendipity? I think Michael Nielsen might have used that term. Like, is it possible to change your environment? Environment meaning basically the sort of the state you're learning in. So it could include like the articles you're reading, just the people you engage with, the people you have conversations with. Can you adjust that in order to make the likelihood of you reaching, like having some useful association that creates value as you define it? Is it possible to design for that, or is it just always going to be this random process that you can't control at all?
Yeah, I mean the environment design piece is really interesting to me, and it does seem like there's a lot of value you could extract from that. But it seems like the utility of looking at things this way and quantifying things this way, it increases hugely once you have like more than a few people doing it. If you have a diversity of people, because what a problem might occur is like we're programmers and Alexi is a programmer and so many people in the SM Discord are programmers that if they all gave us their value function, it would look somewhat similar and we'd have a little bit of rigidity in terms of like what the input was and what the output was. I mean, maybe we're coding different things, but roughly it's similar.
Yeah.
And I think if we could find some way to popularize this framework of separating things into input and output and basically quantifying your output as compared to your input and adjusting your value function to optimize, right? Or adjusting your input to optimize for the value function. Then we could get some really solid ideas about like true behaviors that can be performed to optimize output and optimize input in terms of value. So I don't know. I mean, it seems like it's really contingent on popularizing the framework so we can get more data from a bunch of people who work in different fields and they're all successful, so you can fiddle with the numbers for yourself and optimize for it.
Yeah, it definitely seems worthwhile. I had a question about just sort of like a thought experiment. Like, what would you do if there were no constraints? What would you do to change your environment so that you could what sort of environment could you create for yourself given zero constraints that would allow you to create value as you define it to the largest extent possible?
I've actually thought about this a fair degree. I think things like automating certain aspects of your life, so all of your things are taken care of in your household, like making the food, like someone just gives you food all the time. Like I think that's a really easy win because you don't have to think about it. Someone just gives you the same food on a schedule, so your body reacts the same way. You're expecting it. You know it's gonna happen.
So you're like a hamster in a cage.
Yes, exactly right.
You just have to
gotta optimize all these variables.
Yeah, you just have to focus on running around the wheel. Everything else is careful.
Yeah, exactly. That's all that matters.
Yeah,
and I think another aspect of it is optimizing the room that you work in, and also the room that you sleep in. Could be the same room, I guess. But the room that you work in, obviously, to me, it seems like you should have a good lighting environment for the circadian health. You should have like the temperature should be. It should be the perfect temperature. I know this sounds crazy, but to me, this is the type of variable that matters. It should be the perfect temperature all the time. You should never go, I'm too hot, I'm too cold. You're wasting your brain power on that. That's a waste of time. You can't do that. And the room that you sleep in, I think it should be, perfectly dark so that you're not woken up by the sun prematurely. And it should also be perfectly silent so there's no noises that wake you up. Okay. It's just things like that. Everything about your life should be optimized so that nothing disturbs you. I even think someone else should pick out your clothes, so you don't have to make any. You don't have to make any decisions. All that stuff should be delegated.
Okay, nice. It's so funny. Your interpretation of environment was so literal. It was literally the things around you.
Yeah. I mean, you could talk about your digital environment as well, but the physical environment seems really important to me.
How about in terms of other people? How important do you think it is to optimize the people in your environment?
I think that's super important, and that's one of the reasons I always talk about that house where all of us live together. Because to me, what could be better in life than living in the same place as a bunch of really creative, wonderful people that are helping inspire you and contribute new ideas? I mean, imagine it, right? Let's say you're writing something, or you're working on a piece of code, and you get stuck, or you're just a little bit fatigued. So you go out into the main room, and there's a bunch of other people who are also taking a break, and they're also very creative. Maybe they work in the same field as you do. And so you both have a chat, or many of you have a chat, and you contribute to each other's ideas, you inspire each other, and you're left feeling energized and recharged and inspired instead of just fatigued, not knowing what to do. Oh, I'm stuck on that problem. Whatever. Dude, that would be incredible. I really think you could create so much more value if you optimized your environment in that way by surrounding yourself with really creative, wonderful people.
Yeah, I totally agree. But maybe some people would say, do you think there's much value in physically living together when we have the internet and we can just communicate over the internet? Or do you think that there's something totally different about living together with people physically that just makes it a lot more valuable for you?
To me, it's like a tiered thing. So the lowest level of communication to me, no doubt, is text messaging. Okay. I know, look, if you're a writer and you're good at it, you may say, no, I can convey a lot with writing. Whatever, that's fine, I'm happy for you. But it's not the same as hearing someone's voice. Just evolutionarily, biologically, we're wired up to hear people's voices and also to see people's faces. Although hearing people's voices can be a great substitute, but text messaging to me is just so low on the totem pole of value. But there is something intangible about seeing someone in person and the ease with which you can go into their space. Like, the only way I can contact you on Discord is if you answer this call. You know what I mean? But in person, if you're just like out in the kitchen and I just go out into the kitchen and you're there, now we're having a chat. That's just automatic. Boom. And there's something about that. Plus, there's something about seeing people's faces, body language, how they're reacting. Yeah. That kind of thing.
If you're someone who likes to just gesticulate a lot, then you're kind of screwed when you're communicating through Discord, I guess.
Yeah, this whole time I'm moving my hands. I talk with my hands a lot, and that's totally lost. Nobody can see.
Yeah. I wonder if your feelings about text are due to like text itself, or if it's just because the ease with which you can send messages sort of incentivizes, it's sort of a perverse incentive for people to just spam you all the time with really low value stuff that expires after like 10 minutes, the value expires so quickly. Or because I guess you find a lot of value in emailing with people, right? And
Yeah.
at its core, it's the same technology, really. You're sending text to each other over the internet. So what's different between email and just texting with someone?
Well, I mean, I consider it all the same. I don't mean to say that there are no mediums which use text that are valuable. I don't mean to say that. Because obviously, like email, I've gotten a tremendous amount of value from email. And even Discord, I've gotten a tremendous amount of value from the text messages on Discord. And I'm not saying there's no value in it. I'm just saying it's so low fidelity compared to hearing someone's voice or seeing someone's face. It doesn't connect up emotionally in the same way. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Perhaps we should start getting using a webcam while we do this.
I mean, maybe we could do that. I definitely think it would add a layer of connection. Although, something weird about this, and I've noticed this after having like Zoom calls and stuff.
Okay.
There's something kind of fatiguing about it that is not fatiguing about real life interaction. I don't exactly know what it is. It might be like lag, or it might be because when you're reading someone's facial expressions, it happens instantly in person, and your brain just does it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just automatic. But if there's like a lag, it's like really weird. Something gets messed up and you can't do it right, and I don't know. It just makes you really tired. At least it does for me, and maybe other people are better at it, but I'm not so good at it.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult to have conversations over the internet that are as smooth as conversations in real life, of course, just because of the slight delay. It just changes so much about the conversation and the way information is communicated through the internet and through webcams, which are just slightly pixelated. It's funny how just those small changes, however small they are, they do affect the conversation in a really large way. And like you said,
yeah, it's huge.
It's so much more exhausting as well. I agree to communicate through webcam than it is just in real life.
Yeah, when you're in front of someone's face in real life, there's nothing about it that feels like, oh man, I'm gonna get really tired from this. It doesn't have that feeling to it, but for whatever reason, Zoom does. And like one thing that's expressed, even with like just voice, is people talk over each other way more on video than you do in person. Like when you're talking over someone in person, it's obvious. You're all right there. You can see that one person's talking while another person is. You can see that. But in Discord, it might just be there's a lag, or I started 1 second or half second before you, and you didn't hear me because it hadn't gotten to you yet, so you started speaking. And then we both just kept going, not knowing when to stop.
Yeah.
And it just messed up the whole flow of the thing. And it's like, man, it's definitely not as good as being in person. I don't know how it could be.
We should play the clip of us starting the podcast the first time. We had to cut out.
Yeah, that was purely because of Discord. Purely because of it. If we had been in person, there is no way that would have happened.
Yeah. Okay, so...
Because basically, all that happened was I asked James how he was doing, and then he asked me, and I forget if I answered or not, but I just instantly wanted to jump into it, and I accidentally talked over him, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say, what do you think about this conversation we just had in relation to lectures? Do you think that lectures are more valuable in person, or do you think that there's a difference?
That's interesting. I never really thought of it. I think I don't actually think there's a difference, because all that matters is that you get the information. It's not really a conversation. I mean, I guess if you wanted to ask a question, that's obviously a loss in value, but other than that, I think it's the same. What do you think?
I think it's like opposite to how it is when you're having a conversation. Sort of similar to the reason you gave, is that it's not really a conversation, it's more information being communicated to you. And I think that even if there was a benefit in terms of being able to see non-verbal communication in person, and that if that provided some benefit somehow, I still think that there are so many things you lose out on when you have to attend in person. Like, it's such a massive inconvenience to go physically to a place and sit there listening at 1x speed, not being able to skip, not being able to pause, not really being able to context switch to something else if it just gets boring, find a different lecture or whatever. It just seems like the tiny benefit that you'd gain from being there in person does not outweigh all of the negatives that you have to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, I'm not even sure such a benefit exists. I mean, think about it. Because much of the problem with digital communication comes from the fact that you say something and then I have to say something back. But if you say something and I don't have to say anything back, it's not clear to me that anything is lost. Because there's no lag issue, there's nothing like that. It's just, I'm just listening in the same way that I'd be listening if you were here. Obviously, that's even better if I could see your face, like in a lecture. So I feel like you're getting all the benefits. Unless there's something intangible about just being in a physical space. Maybe there are other people there that energizes you. I don't know. Maybe the place is beautiful and it's nice to be there. I don't know. I mean, whatever it is. But I doubt that it's anything like social.
Yeah,
like
it seems to be all intangibles. That's what I find people mostly point to when I ask that question. It's just like, yeah, there are all these negatives, but have you thought about how pretty the hall looks, or what effect it has, just being in that environment and the atmosphere,
Yeah.
It always feels
it's a funny point. Yeah. Have you asked a lot of people that? Like, what do people mostly prefer?
I think most people prefer just to watch lectures online. I mean, yeah, it just seems like such a massive inconvenience. Like, it's like it's so bad in so many ways, because it's like this massive fixed block in your schedule that you can't move. So that's inconvenient. The inability to change the speed is obviously insane. You can't pause, which sucks. Which you can do all these things so easily online. I don't know. I really see no benefit whatsoever to most lectures. Obviously, there are you can do talks in person that give you something that you can't get just by watching it on the internet. Like, if there's some sort of performance aspect to it, or
absolutely,
or some sort of special way you're using the physical space to convey some message. Like, I'm thinking of like a light show, or like those physics demonstrations or something. Yeah, maybe, but it really seems to me that the insane number of disadvantages just you can't justify it, really.
I completely agree with that. And obviously, the obvious exception is, like you said, performances. Nobody would say that a concert is just as good on the internet as it was in real life. Nobody would say that. But that's obvious, because it's about the energy. A lot of the value there is about the energy. If you're just talking about straight up learning, I totally agree with you. The benefits are plentiful if you're watching it online. Like, the ability to rewind if you missed something or you didn't understand. Like, that's totally lost. Yeah. It could completely diminish the value of a lecture in person, because maybe you missed one point or you didn't understand it or you need supplemental information. Yeah. Online, you can just pause and Google something or whatever, and then you come back to it and the whole thing makes sense. So, I totally agree with that.
I wonder if there is a way, or can you think of a way, to make lectures more performative, or could you change them to sort of include what we see as other valuable like in-person performances having? Is there a way to give lectures that?
It seems clear to me that if you're in a small group, the lecture is more valuable in person. Like if someone's speaking to a group of 8 people, that seems sort of obviously more valuable than if it's like in a big lecture hall or whatever. for some reason, it just feels more personal to me, and like you could ask a question. Obviously, asking questions is the major loss, but maybe also for things like science experiments, the atmosphere of it wouldn't be totally captured on video. I don't know really. I mean, do you have some ideas around that?
No. I mean, like you said, I think smaller lectures or seminars or tutorials, those sort of things, where you're expected to contribute. It's not like you go to hear someone speak. It's like you go to discuss. Those sort of meetings, those sort of group discussions are really useful. I wonder if there's a way to recreate that just over Discord. You know, I mean, we've tried to do those sort of discussions. Do you think they come close to like the value you get from an in-person discussion?
I don't know. I mean, what tends to happen with the Discord discussions, the group Discord discussions, is that one or two, maybe three people will dominate the conversation. They'll take up, 80% of the airtime, and the rest of the people, and it may be 15 people in there, don't really say much. You know what I mean? And so I wonder. I mean, obviously, in person that happens too. If you're in a group, some people say more stuff than other people. That happens, but I wonder if you could physically see someone and directly ask for their opinion or something like that, it could change the dynamic. And some people are more shy, and that's just whatever. And you could give them confidence to speak up by talking directly to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a kind of ambiguous when you're just speaking on Discord, whether someone's there or not. So if someone's muted, it might just be because they don't want to make noise on the mic while they're listening to people, or it might just be because they aren't listening at all and they're doing something else, or just that they don't want to talk. And so you can't really directly address someone and ask for their opinion and sort of force them to give an answer like you can in social situations. And it sounds It sounds like I'm like saying it's good to make people uncomfortable or demand that they give you an answer, but that's not really the thing. It's just like it's like a very light form of coercion, or a very sort of slight social pressure just to give your opinion, or get someone to give their opinion.
Extremely slight.
Yeah. And often when someone's slightly uncomfortable about saying something, it's because they have something really interesting to say. So it's like it can be really beneficial to get them to try to articulate their view on something,
Yeah. So in that way, I wonder if there are some optimizations that could be made on Discord to more closely emulate a real life group conversation. Although I'm a little bit lacking confidence. It doesn't seem like there would be.
I think maybe webcams. Maybe that would help, because then you can see if someone's physically there or not. You still can't really tell if they're listening properly, but
yeah. I mean, webcams would alleviate that problem, not knowing if someone's there. But also, in a group, you can just look at someone's face. You can just look at someone's eyes. When, if you're speaking and you go, "What do you think about that?" and you just look at someone, then they know it's your turn to say something.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. Exactly.
So, yeah, I think that's interesting. But I just want to go back to the environment question, and I want to ask you the same thing. What are some things you feel like you could optimize about your environment, both physical and digital, I suppose, to create more valuable output?
A while back, I had this idea for somehow creating both an online network of people plus a local physical network of people to do projects with. And so the idea was that you could do your own individual learning on SM or whatever, do your reps in the morning, and then at noon or in the afternoon you'd meet up and do project work or something together.
Right.
But I don't really have a good insight on how to make that happen, or how that would manifest itself. Nowadays I'm leaning more towards just focusing on creating a network over the internet, just because I think if you're interested in something quite niche, or if you're interested in doing like a project on something specific rather than being interested in something broad like macroeconomics, like your best bet is to find as many people as possible and ask them, do you want to work with me on this project? Because you need to search through enough people to find someone who's interested in that specific thing the same way you are. And so the best way to do that, I think, is on the internet, just because there are so many people interested in weird niche communities and stuff. So I'd probably say that's the best way to go.
I that seems right to me. It's way easier to find people who share your interests on the internet, and in some way that's obvious because there's more people you have access to. And in another way, it's like it's easier to create a space on the internet. It's not so easy to create a physical space. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And another thing I was interested in was like, so schools and universities as in their role as matchmakers between students, they sort of act as like matchmakers between people who are interested in the same thing, but they match people based on really large, broad themes like economics or computer science, when in reality, like within each of these domains, there's just such, you can go, it can become so fine-grained, you know, in terms of the things you're actually interested in within computer science or within economics. So one of the things I've been interested in is like, how do you match people effectively based on a really small unit of mutual interest?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the really interesting things to me, because prior to the internet, the primary way that you would network with people as a young person was at school. And obviously that happens in the earlier schools, but mostly at university, people would network with people that they might start a business with, you know? And when I was deciding whether or not to go to university, the social aspect and then the aspect of like, what kind of interesting people could I meet? That was the most intriguing part of it to me. But also, an interesting point to me is the value of community in forming yourself. I remember reading in this book, Atomic Habits, he mentions a little anecdote about this astronaut, Mike Massimino, who took a robotics class at MIT. And it was a very small class. There was only 10 people in it. And of the 10 people in that class, 4 of them became astronauts.
Oh, wow.
And the core of that point is like, if you're in a community like that, it can really change what happens to you, because communities can have a huge effect on things you do and, you know, behavior change and this kind of thing. So I think the internet can, in a way, be a kind of replacement for that. And when you think about the SMA Discord, it's just a group of people who really like learning, and simply being a part of it makes you more likely to do more learning, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I wonder if those astronauts, had they been placed in a different class, or had they not joined that robotics class, would they still have become astronauts? Would they still have become as successful as they later became?
Right.
Was it something innate within them that caused them to be astronauts, or was it the community, just being part of the community itself? Like, did the community create something that wasn't there before? You know?
I mean, unless the class was, and I unfortunately don't know the details, so it could be reversing the causal relationship. It could just be that people who are interested in becoming an astronaut join this class. Obviously, that could be it. But unless the class was directed at people who wanted to become an astronaut, it seems unlikely to me that 4 of any group of 10 would become an astronaut. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So communities are definitely valuable, and that's a value add from university, and it's also, like I say, it's a value add from the internet now. Discord can do this. Online communities can provide you with that real sense of belonging and change your behavior and this kind of thing.
I wonder if there'll be any future astronauts from the SMA Discord.
Oh man, astronauts are amazing. They're so skilled. They're physically fit. They have perfect vision. You have to have some sort of advanced degree. They're tremendous people.
I agree. And on that note, I think we should end it.
All right.
Pretty beautiful.
Beautiful.
All right. See you next time.
See ya.